How's it? And welcome to this video where we'll be building some basic Azure infrastructure using Terraform. First off, if you don't know what Terraform is, I strongly advise you go to their website to read up more on their documentation and some of their tutorials. But essentially, Terraform is a tool that allows you to codify your infrastructure. So infrastructure as code, if you've heard the term. And through that, you're able to more repeatably build environments, as well as track changes to environments as your product evolves. If you want a sneak preview of what the next sort of couple of videos are, you can head over to my GitHub and take a look at these two repos specifically. So lots of the stuff that I'm going to cover in this video and in the next ones, the content for that are already in these repos. And then lastly, the code for this specific repo, or video should I say, will be available on my demo organization in the Building Basic Azure Infrastructure using Terraform repo, as well as there'll be a post that will land on my blog shortly that will come with the video that has lots of the key points of the code sitting with it. Okay, so first off, what are we going to do? So I thought to give us a nice run through of the different bits of sort of quite a basic infrastructure. We should go ahead and build a VM. Yes, VMs isn't really what you should be wanting to build when you're in cloud, but it's good for some use cases. And on my specific infrastructure, I've gone with VMs at the moment, and the idea is that I'll evolve that going forward, and with that evolve the Terraform scripts and write posts and share videos of how that evolves over time, so that depending on where you are in your journey, you could potentially follow along with that. So the first thing we're going to want to create is a VM. That VM is going to need to belong to a network. Part of what we want as part of our demo is we want to talk to storage, and then, but talking to that storage, we don't want to have connection strings sitting inside of our VM. So we're going to use manage identity. So we're going to want to set that up. Now, if I take a look at my code that we've got here so far, we've got a very basic setup. So we've got a main.tf, and this currently just says that our backend is going to be stored in Azure RM. We're using the Azure Resource Manager provider as well for our infrastructure. We're referencing the data source for the current setup, so that the current configuration. And then we're going to output the tenant ID and the subscription ID from what the current auth credential is for our session. We're also going to go ahead and create a resource group. So we're just going to alias this as main, and the resource group is going to be called demo4, then an environment variable, and then RG. And we're going to deploy it to the variable deployed region. And then we're going to say that we want to prevent this from being destroyed, as well as outputting the name of this resource group for once we do an apply. We also have some variables here, which you saw referenced before. So the name of a resource group, the name where we want to deploy our resource group to, as well as an environment name. And then in our local variables, we go and populate what those variables should be, as well as we've configured a backend here, which you can see at the moment goes to a different resource group. So demo4 shared RG with a storage account of demo4 DSO, the container name TF state, and then the key being local.tf state. We've got a script in here currently that will create our backend for us. and all that's going to do is it's got some parameters for the same variables that's in the local backend. That's going to go ahead and create the resource group for us. It's then going to create the storage account for us and then create the container. And then locally, I've got this file that's not checked into source control. And what that'll do is it'll do a Azure login. It'll then set the subscription to my subscription that I use for demos, and it will just show that subscription. So to make sure that this is currently set, first we're going to need to go to our scripts folder. So from that scripts folder, we'll set the local environment variables. So at the moment, that's not really setting much. It's just doing a login. But generally, and the reason why I don't put this file in source control, so you can see it is currently ignored, is because if I do have secrets locally, I'll keep them in there instead of setting them the actual environment variables. That way its lifespan is the lifespan of the session, and I can have different variables for different apps, and it works quite well for me for my sort of debug cycle. So now we've set our local variables, we're going to go ahead and create that backend. And while that backend is creating, I'm going to go ahead and show you, for example, if you wanted to build or see how you can create this, how you would look that up. So if we had to just go here and go to Google and we say Terraform resource group, generally find something like this. And if you go into that, you'll see an example of how you create a resource group. If you were to say that you wanted to create a storage account, you'll say Terraform Azure Storage. Again, come across a very similar example, and that would say this is what you need to do to create a storage account. You're going to need the resource group. You're then going to need the storage account. The storage account references the resource group, and that's how you get started. Once you get to this point, you can go and change different variables. They do sometimes give you multiple examples for different types of setups. So you can see in this instance, it's created a subnet, and that it's told that subnet that it's going to need to talk to SQL and to storage. But then if you scroll a little bit lower, you can see all the different arguments that are provided to the resource when you create it. And then I think right at the bottom, oh gosh, let's see. This one has a lot of potential arguments. And then right at the bottom is the attribute reference, which has, these are all the values that you're able to reference out of it. So if we go look back at this, you can see where we reference the Azure RM resource group .main.name. That is referencing this resource, and we're specifically referencing the name attribute in it. So those are all the values that get exported. Now, if you are needing to not create a resource, so in this specific example, this would go ahead and create a storage account. If you needed to reference an existing storage account that wasn't created as part of your scripts, you can go look at the data sources section. So if you had to click on that, you'll see that you can reference an existing storage account in this example by saying data, the name of the storage account, as well as the resource group. And then similar to anything else, you can output that. The main difference here being where if you created a resource, you would just use this part of the reference. Because this is the data source, you have to do data dot to reference this resource. Okay, so we're going to get going with creating our app. So you can see the storage account there is created for us. We're going to start off by creating some storage. So let's actually just close this off. And you go new file. Well, I suppose before we do that, let's see if this works. So the first thing we need to do is run an init. So I need to go fix all of these because I just recently changed the name of my environment. So let's change that to local plan. I'm going to change that to be local, and the plan to also be local. Okay, so what are we doing here? When we run an init, which is that command, we're going to call Terraform init. We're going to pass it the variables file, which is this file. We're also going to tell it where our backend configuration is, or where the file for that is, and this is going to tell it where to install those state files. At the moment, when that's, well, I suppose when that's run, but more importantly, when we created the backend already, you'll see that we've got this demo 4 shared RG, which has got the demo 4 DSO storage accounts in it. If we go to containers, that will have our TF state inside of it. You can see already we've got that local TF state just from running the init currently. Then to go ahead and get ready to apply this, we want to run a plan. So if we clear that out, run a plan. What the plan is going to do is it's going to pick up any files that have .tf, and it's going to mush those all together, figure out what it needs to do to build out this infrastructure based on what configuration we have. If it's going to give us a summary of what that looks like in the console, and it's going to save that plan because of our variables to out, using this out variable to a TF plan file. Again, for this we pass it the local variables, and we tell it input false, and basically what that's going to do is if we don't supply a variable, it's not going to keep a lock on the state file and prompt us for input. Instead, it's just going to say this doesn't exist, and we'll have to rerun the plan again and provide that information. So you can see through this plan, it's given us a little key indicator at the top of what the different changes are. So you'd see if there is destroys and replaces, it'll show you those here as well. In our case, it's only creating infrastructure. So it's saying it's going to, for creates, you'll see the plus sign. And if you read it through, it says, cool, Terraform will perform the following actions. It's going to go ahead and create this resource, which is creating a resource called that. The ID will be known after the apply. The location is going to be West Europe, and the name is going to be demo 4 local RG. It gives you a summary and says that it plans to add one thing. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to destroy anything. And then changes to the outputs is that we're adding all of these outputs to the output. And obviously those come from sections where we've gone and said that we want these outputs. So now we'll go ahead and apply our changes. So when we run an apply, we call Terraform apply. We tell it to auto approve because in our case we've run the plan, we've looked at the plan, we're happy with the plan, and we pass in the plan file that's local on disk. That will go ahead and apply that infrastructure, and when it does apply that infrastructure, we're going to see that show up inside Azure. Let's give that a moment quickly. You can see that's worked now, so it's added one resource. If we go over to Azure, just give this a little refresh, and maybe another little refresh. Storage. Oh wait, we just created a resource group. We didn't create any storage accounts. So you should see other demo 4 local. So we've just created this. Obviously there's nothing inside of it yet. So next up, what we're going to go do is create some resources. So let me just say update environment in that files. So do the magics. Okay. So to start off, so we don't actually need that open anymore. We don't need that open anymore. We're going to create a storage.tf, and in the storage.tf, we're going to create a storage account called demo4 environment name DSO. We're going to reference the resource group and location for that resource group from the resource group we've already created. We're going to say that it should be standard tier, use local redundancy, gain prevent deletion of this, and we're going to create a container inside of this called app data, referencing that storage account that we've just created, the main one. So one of the things we want to do is that storage account. If we look back here, so that would be this one ticked off. The next thing that we want to do is create a network. So we're going to go ahead and say network.tf. In this network.tf, what we've got is a virtual network. Again, we're just going to call it main. We'll use the environment name to distinguish the different networks, which will be for our different environments. Inside that, we're just going to create one subnet called external. We're going to need a public IP for when we access this VM. Also going to need an NSG. Again, we're using that environment name everywhere to make the resource names more distinguished between the different environments once we have it. As part of that NSG, we're going to put some default rules in. So we're going to say that HTTP access is denied, HTTPS access is allowed, and then for SSH access, we're going to do that based off a variable, and then we're going to attach our app external network interface to our NSG, and you can see we've referenced this app external interface in a couple of places, and that's going to come from one of the other files we created just now. And at the bottom here, we're just saying that we're going to have a variable which is SSH access. Generally, I don't think you would always put this with the file. For the purposes of the demo, I am, because it just makes more sense for demo purposes. So that's our network created. And next up, we're going to want to create the identity that our VM is going to use when it talks to our storage. So we're going to go ahead and say identity.tf. And yeah, we're going to create an Azure application, call it demo4 with the environment name. We're then going to create a service principal for that application, and we're going to assign owner role for that service principal. So service principal main, grab the object ID for it. We're going to assign owner role to the main resource group. So that resource group that we've created specifically for this environment, we're going to say that this service principal owns that resource group, so it'll be able to do anything with it when you authenticate with that group. And then from this, we want to output the Azure app name, so the display name of the app, as well as the client ID of that application. Then one of the last things that we want to do, and this is going to be quite a big one, is the VM. So we go here, obviously tick off identity. Lastly, we're going to do VM, and this is quite a lengthy file. But similar to the others, it's just a whole bunch of resources, in this case a data source to a file that exists. So here's that network interface that we referenced previously. So here's the network interface app external, and here's us defining that app external. So this is going to get referenced from inside that network file. And then we're giving it a name, again referencing the resource group location and name for where this needs to be created. Some IP configuration. We have a data source for a template file. So we haven't created this template file yet, but basically what we're going to do is create a vm.sh with a whole bunch of scripts that should run when the VM starts. And then for that VM, we want to pass it some parameters. So we want to give it the resource group that we've created, as well as the storage account that we've created, so that the VM, when it starts up inside the cloud-init script, it can go and fetch some data out of that storage account. We're then going to go ahead and create the actual virtual machine itself. We'll just reference this as app for now, and the name again using that environment variable. For the size, we're going to go to variables again. We're going to have a variable for the admin user, a variable for the admin password. That template file gets base64 encoded and passed through to the custom data field. And then we specify the network interfaces to be added. So again, that's this one at the top here. We specify for this VM we want to use managed identity. We want to use user assigned, not system identity. And then because we're doing user assigned, we specify what the identity is. So that's going to be that user assigned identity that we've created somewhere here. I think we created it somewhere here. Maybe I'm missing a piece. If it breaks, we'll see. We specify that we want the source to be a Ubuntu 2010 Gen 2 SKU, and we specify what we want for the operating system. And then again, yeah, we just specify what our variables are. So you'll notice what's different here is that we saying that the username and the password are both sensitive. Generally, your username might not be sensitive. For the setup that I have, I've set them as sensitive. And then, as mentioned, we need one more file for this, and that is the vm.sh. And inside that vm.sh file, we're going to start off by waiting for the network to be up and running. So if we don't do this, then all these changes to the repositories end up failing, which means the rest of the scripts end up failing. So we start off waiting for the network. We then just capture those variables that we passed in. So back at the top here, we said yes, some vars that get passed to our template file. This is where we're capturing what those variables are. So then we go make a whole bunch of changes to the source list. We specify that if anything we're installing needs a reboot, allow it to reboot. And then we're going to go ahead and install Azure CLI. We need to access the access storage, and part of accessing storage needs storage preview to be installed. So we're going to go ahead and install that. And then we're going to use the Azure CLI to do a login, and we're going to specify that it must use the identity assigned to the current resource. So that will talk to a local service, which gets installed with the one of the VM extensions. That will then go and check what identities are assigned to the specific machine. And similar to when you do as accounts show, where it says, well, this one says this is the one that you specifically assigned. When you go and do this identity, and where it normally shows you the array of accounts that you have, if you have multiple identities, this is going to show you that full list, and then you'll have to go and do the set So similar to where we go and say account set for a specific subscription, you're going to have to choose the specific identity that you want to use if you do have multiple identities assigned to this resource. We're then going to go and make a directory called for app, and we're going to use the Azure CLI to download everything out of the app data container from the storage account at the top with a source path filter of everything, and we want to save that to the local folder that we've just created above here, and then we want to say we want to do recursive. So we'll go back to terminal, and because we've changed what the files are, we need to do a plan. Before we do that plan though, we need to go and add some more, not to there, we want to go to our actual environment, and we're going to set some of those variables that we had previously set. So I'm actually going to go ahead and set this to allow for SSH, so that we'll be able to follow along as the machine gets created. We set the VM size to DS2. We're going to leave the admin user as user admin, and then we want to go ahead and set this password. As I mentioned before, I currently just use this file to set all my stuff so that it's easy for me to switch between my different projects while I'm on my local machine. And what Terraform will do is, if you have a variable called tf underscore file underscore and then the name of a variable, so this at the moment is obviously the name of my variable, I'm going to go and set that to this value, and then before I run the plan, I'm going to actually set, well, to not make it do an auth again, I'll just go and set this one password. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and run a plan. This should work, unless, as I mentioned, we had broken something with the setup of our identity. So what have we broken? Oh, we didn't do an init. So because we've changed what we're referencing, you can see it now says, well, we actually need these other providers as well. We need to go ahead and run an init again so that it can pull down the different extra references that we're going to need for our infrastructure to be able to be applied. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and do our plan, and hopefully our plan runs through as expected. So I think I do know the part that is missing for our infrastructure. Yeah, so that references app data. Managed resource hasn't been declared. Okay, let's go look at that. So one of the other things that I had mentioned that we might need that I had forgotten is this. So we need the user managed identity, which gets referenced. Let's close some of these. Let's close all of those. So if we go back to identity, just keep this open. So there's user managed identity for app. What did we call it here? So if we scroll down, user identity app. So app, this is not a data source. That's the main one, and we'll just call it that same name. So that's going to fix that problem which we had seen earlier and wasn't sure about for referencing this. And then it's saying that the template file app cloud-init references the storage account, and it's saying it doesn't have a managed storage account for that. So let's go to the VM, saying this doesn't exist. Looks like it is a different shade of color. So, oh, we called it main. Okay, so let's go to the VM, call that main. Very subtly, that changed from black to blue. So let's do the plan again. This should plan through now as expected without any issues because we fixed the user managed identity as well as the storage. Okay, so you can see again a whole bunch of green ticks or green pluses here telling us it's going to go and create a lot of infrastructure for us. So if we take a look, scroll, you can see all the like the VM that's going to be created, all the rules that's going to be created. Basically everything that we've just gone and defined inside the Terraform scripts is all going to get created for us now. So we can go ahead and apply this. And this again, we'll go and use that plan file that is just created and apply these changes to us for us to Azure. You can see at this point now, it's saying that it is still creating the VM. That creation is the creation of the resource itself inside Azure, but it won't wait until that cloud init is finished running. It'll just wait until the machine says I'm up. So we'll connect into that machine when it's up and watch it actually stand itself up. So we go, yeah, did we output that IP address? No. So what we're going to do is just go to networking quickly. And what did we call it? Pip. So we're saying that we're capturing an output thing because my brain is not fully working right now. Output there. So we want to grab that, put it into the network. We want to say that we want to output the pip. So let's just say pip and there's that dot pip dot gosh, that's no address. There we go. So again, because we made changes here, we're going to quickly do a plan. The plan is just going to say that we've changed what the output is. Obviously, we could have gone to Azure and fetched this information, but generally we would want this. Apparently that does not exist. So here we go, control space pops up the list. So let's plan that again, and that one should work. The list being IntelliSense. So we could have gone here and run this. Well, refresh this. This would have shown us all our things, and then we could have clicked on the resource, and then from the resource, when that opens, we could have gone here and copied that IP address, which we've now gone and done. But in this case, that's going to show us stuff. I will show you that now. Admin user at that address. Yes, we want to trust it. And the password we have set in our local over here. So that's going to get us in. And then we want to go and tail this file. So we go to tail with the -f, that file. So this at the moment, if you remember some of the things that this file was doing. So adding all the repos, doing the app update, that's currently what's running. So we'll leave that for a bit while that's still running. If we go back here, as mentioned earlier, it says that the changes we're making is just adding that to the output. So if we go and do clear apply, that apply is going to not make any changes to the infrastructure, but it is going to give us an extra piece of output to our outputs. So you can see there was no changes that were made, but we now have this extra pip output, which we would have been able to use to go and connect to this machine. You can see at the moment it's busy setting up the Azure CLI. So that's this next segment over here. And then once that's done, it will go ahead and install the storage preview extension. And then it's going to do an Azure login using the managed identity that was assigned to it. So there's the storage preview. I saw a warning for it somewhere saying that it was installing it. It says there was no credentials supplied to the machine. Let's go ahead and just double check that. So if we go and look at the machine, maybe we didn't connect something up properly. Identity. It is definitely there. That's interesting. So if we leave this and we go and run that ourselves, so we do as login. No access was configured for the VM, hence no subscriptions. There's definitely access for this VM. I mean, it shows us that there's access for this VM in place. That's not ideal. Can we break anything that would have broken our VM? Let's see. Shouldn't have. See the version that's installed. Currently. I think that's the latest. Close to the latest. 236, 239, and is actually later. I wonder if the reason is because we haven't actually given it any access yet. So let's go here, and we're gonna add in a role assignment. This is actually app, not front door. So app main storage access. That's gonna access the storage account with reader and data access. That identity and main. So that will give it the identity. I'm going to want this to recreate itself. So as a hack, I'm just going to add a new line to it. We want to exit from here. And you can see I was playing around trying to figure out what was going on there. So plan this again. That should say that it's going to replace our VM and it's going to create the access rule for us. Okay, so that's done. As mentioned earlier when we were looking at the legend, it says when it's the plus, it's going to be a create, and a minus and a plus is going to destroy, and then do a create replacement. So this resource in its entirety is going to get replaced, which is our whole VM. And the reason that this is all going to happen is because there was a forced replacement because the custom data changed. As much as possible, it will tell you, okay, it knows what's going to be there before and after, because it knows what those values are or should be based on if they're statically defined or if they're from referenced data. And then the role assignment that we added is the other thing that is going to show up there. So now when this gets created, it should actually work for us perfectly fine. You can see over here, it's taken quite a while to destroy that VM, but once it's finished destroying, you can see it took like around about a minute to destroy it, 53 seconds to be specific. It'll go ahead and start creating it again. And similar to last time, it will, when the VM reports that it's up, this will finish and return back to us to say, okay, that VM's created, but the cloud-init script itself wouldn't have finished running yet. Okay, and that's done. So we should be able to go reconnect to this thing again. It's going to complain that the key has changed, and somewhere here it tells us how we can be dodgy. To remove that, so we're going to do that. Run this. Say yes. It needs the password. So I say dodgy. It wasn't actually dodgy. I'm just saying dodgy. So password to get us back in again. Then we want to grab this file. So we're going to go into the table. That file again. Again, if we look through this, this is going through this part. At the moment, it's then going to install the Azure CLI for us, and hopefully this login works now that we've actually given that identity some roles. So I'll let this continue and we'll check back in a little while. Okay, so it's gone and installed our storage preview extension again. You can see this time it actually did do some work. So when it ran the login, this is the accounts that came back. So it said that this is the tenant ID that's connected to, this is the subscription name that it's connected to using that managed identity. Using this then as well, when it ran the file copy, it said it did copy everything. Obviously we haven't put anything in there yet, so there was nothing specific to copy, but you can see the run itself didn't fail, so we know that this copy did work. In a future video, we will be pulling stuff off there, which is going to extend on sort of this usage of Terraform. So quickly before we end this video, it's a full recap inside Azure. So we created this demo shared resource group. Inside that, we created a storage account which we're using as our backend, which stores our state inside in a TF state container. Then we also have a local resource group, which we created the storage account in. We created managed identity, the network pieces that we need, a public IP address, a network security group, as well as a VM, If we go to that network security group, you can see the rules that we had defined, so specifically allowing SSH into this machine, that's sitting there. From here, we could go ahead and change this if we wanted to. So from here, we can go and deny, and then when we rerun it again, it will reapply based on what our current rules are. One of the things that you might have noticed though, when I did show this earlier, is that the Terraform site says that you can provision, change, and version resources on any environment, but that any environment also means any cloud. Well, there we go. It says any cloud. Um, the thinking behind when people use Terraform in general is that they are they're using one common language or one common definition, which looks like this for the Terraform layout. But then the resources you're targeting, like in this case, is Azure RM. I'm specifically targeting Azure. It's not me saying that I have this loose definition. I can just apply it to any. In this instance, I am targeting Azure specifically. But what I can put alongside this is saying that targets AWS or Google, or as you'll see in a future video, I actually define configuration for Cloudflare and GitHub inside my Terraform configuration. So when I have secrets that I need to push to the GitHub secrets, instead of me getting them from either Azure or trying to drop them as an output from the apply, I go to my scripts and I basically just reference it straight off GitHub, and that all gets set for me. But that's a topic for another video. Thanks again for joining me for this one. I hope if you didn't understand what Terraform is or how to use it, that you have a better idea of how to use that now. As I mentioned earlier, you can go to the Building Basic Azure Infrastructure using Terraform repo in my dev-star-ops.org to grab the source code for this, as well as there will be a blog post which will be referenced fully in this about once that is up. Cheers and thanks.